Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, coming to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. Hope everyone out there is doing well on this Friday, October 25th, 2024. It is Football Friday across the world for the United States for high school, college, and football. Of course, I'm representing mine here in Cincinnati. It's the whiteout day, Sunday, coming up for the Eagles and the Bengals. The Bengals going to be wearing their whites. The Eagles going to be wearing their old Kelly green from the 80s. Probably going to be the best uniform matchup. Probably not the best game, but the best uniform matchup. Hope everyone out there is doing well today. Just, got a little bit of a loaded show coming up. Lots to talk about. Somebody's going right down to it. Lots of fireworks over the last few days over many issues. I see a lot of fireworks on my timeline today on the X platform, but I'm going to distance myself from them guys just simply because I don't engage in, internet fights. That's for phonies. I say my piece on them and I just leave it. Let's get right down to it. Of course, the game last night, the Rams over the Vikings. Matthew Stafford, got his two weapons back, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and they managed to perform their job well. They got the win, obviously. Kyron Williams was great. If you have them on your fantasy teams, kudos to you guys. Job well done. Of course, the story here was the end of the game with the missed face mask. Yeah, I'm going to get to the refs here in a second. But it was a good win for the Rams. Getting everybody back, I think, was a big deal. I think, if anything, this cools the trade talk involving both Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford, because apparently they were in trade discussions. But I think now with everybody healthy, I think the Rams are going to try and make a push for one of the wild card spots. And with the uncertainty with the players in San Francisco and Seattle, it looks like the Rams might actually have a shot to win the NFC East. So this kudos to them, and let's see where they go from here. But Minnesota has now lost 2 straight after the 5-0 start. They're still going to be fine, I think. Just that the Rams just got their 2 big weapons back, and I think they're going to be ready to roll. I think they're going to make a push for one of the NFC playoff spots here, especially if everyone can stay upright. It was a great win, a good performance by Matthew Stafford. His 2 receivers got healthy. Demarcus Robinson, 2 touchdowns there. Solid job. But of course, the game was marred by the last play of the last play in the final possession for Minnesota in the end zone, where Byron Young face masked Sam Darnold and blatantly with the referee like this close to you. And I'll admit, I've never been one to say the referees are the reason why games are lost. That's never been my nature. I just think it's just a phony. However, I'll personally acknowledge today, the NFL officials is becoming a bit of a concern. The inconsistencies are a concern. Not to where you can make a stupid comment to say, "Oh my God, the refs cost us a game. Oh my God, the refs did this against this team. Oh, the refs are against us." That's just stupid talk. However, the call that was made again, that should have been made against Sam Darnold was a very, very egregious one, and it does call. I think someone made a point last night to where a call like that, especially in the head area, where college replay officials always review targeting or blows to the head. I think the NFL, with all the money they make, you just wonder why they don't implement something like that. For the so-called integrity of the league, or quote player safety, which everybody knows the NFL just don't give 2 damns about. Never have and never will. I said on previous shows here that they haven't given a darn about. They never give a darn about player safety since the implementation of the Players Association, and they probably never will. They're probably putting some kind of mock interview with this official who missed a call. Basically, he said, "I didn't see it." The problem was replay showed he was basically like at least a good 3 yards within the proximity of where the penalty happened, and that was where the NFL missed it, and they should have thrown the flag. Now, does it mean Minnesota was going to come back and potentially win or tie the game? No, because they had to we gone out of there, probably gone to the 20. That means they would drive 80 yards for a touchdown. They would have had gone for a 2-point conversion to tie it, probably win it in overtime. But how Minnesota's defense played last night, who knows? But the call should have been made. And here we are again having a conversation about egregiously missed calls. I don't want to hear about Vegas because that's a stupid talk. I don't want to hear about it cost Minnesota the game. That's stupid talk because Minnesota's defense let Matthew Stafford just throw all over them that last night. It was a missed call, but not the reason why Minnesota lost. I'm sure we have more about talks about the referees because here we are with having these conversations again. We're going to have many more of these conversations again, simply because, everything's out here now, out in the open. We have social media, crop photos, and it's not even worth talking about anymore because until they legitimately do something, nothing's going to be done. You can sit here, whine and gripe all you want. It doesn't matter. So we'll probably have more conversations about this. An egregious missed call, no doubt. Not the reason why Minnesota lost. Now to another topic. Speaking of the NFL, this broke just a few minutes ago where Roquan Smith got fined for the hip drop tackle on Chris Godwin, or whatever the hell this hip drop tackle is. A few questions I have for this. What in the hell are you penalizing Roquan Smith for? Or fine him for? I get everybody's the hoopla of with Logan Wilson and Mark Andrews in a big game in Baltimore last season, which essentially cost Mark Andrews a season. And of course, he came back for the AFC title game, but was non-existent. You fine him for a penalty. There should have been a penalty that wasn't flagged. But the issue I have with all of this rule was implemented before the season started, and I've seen maybe 5 instances where in every game of every so far this season, at least 5 instances where a flag should have been thrown by their rule of this definition of whatever a hip drop tackle is, and it hasn't been flagged. And not only that, there was one earlier in the game where Antonio Wingfield, I think, did this almost exact same thing to Zay Flowers that knocked Flowers out of the game, I guess. I didn't see that part of it as I went to bed, but I saw the replay of it. It's mind-boggling to me why the NFL wants to try to take something simplistic and make it sophisticated, and they're doing it here with this rule. I get it. Everyone got knee-jerky after what happened last year when Cincinnati visited Baltimore with the Logan Wilson hip drop to Mark Andrews or so-called hip drop to Mark Andrews, and everyone wanted to hit the panic button and act all frenetic and frenzy over stupid stuff, which I don't understand it. But it just calls a question again the hypocrisy of the NFL to do and try to implement a rule and try to force it, which I said before, and many people have said before the season, this is going to be a hard rule to enforce. What's going to classify as such? Now, of course, another big issue I have with this, aside of all this, is why were Roquan Smith and Chris Godwin in the game that late when the game was basically wrapped up? Baltimore had the game pretty much won, and they're up 10 with I think 40 seconds left at that point. Baltimore was up, and 10. I know there's no way Tampa Bay was going to try and rally from that. I'm not trying to say they can't or don't, because I've seen wild stuff in the NFL before. But it makes you wonder why one of the marquee players on Tampa's offense and one of the marquee players on Baltimore's defense was on the field when the game was basically wrapped up. That's something that hasn't been talked about enough. Maybe they needed the snaps. I don't know. I get it. Roquan Smith looked like he came in this season a little bit on the heavy side. Maybe he needed a workout. But this whole hip drop tackle rule, whatever it is, it's a mess, and it's going to be a mess all season long. I counted at least 5 instances this year in all the games I've seen or highlights of where they should have flagged it when they didn't, and nobody even got fined. Probably the first one I've seen of this one being fined this season. It's more of a bigger issue with the NFL than it is of Roquan Smith. Now, I know Roquan Smith can be a bit on the rough side and can toe the line a little bit, but a bigger issue is with the NFL and how they implement this rule. And I just say this also, Bengals fans need to shut up about face masks and Roquan Smith, because y'all did worse than that. Note, I don't want to see a photocrop photo of Joe Burrow being face masked by Patrick Queen, because that was photocropped. That did not really happen. Sit down on that one, Bengals fans. I'm not hearing it. So I'll go more to the NFL later. But yeah, they have a problem with this hip drop rule, and it's still going to be a problem. They created the mess. They made the bed. Once it gets messy, they can go ahead and lie in it. That's my NFL talk for the day. Touch a few more things here. Didn't include some of my titles, but I'll go ahead and talk about it anyways. The NBA is investigating the load management or injury management, if you will, of one Joel Embiid. You know, we know the history of Joel Embiid's injuries. Apparently, he's supposed to be out for the week because the Sixers claimed injury management. Paul George is supposed to be locked out also. But I said on the show before the season started, after Joel Embiid signed that contract extension, you guys got to get it done. You're not off to a good start. You just got spanked by Milwaukee last night. And now, last night or the night before, I can't remember. And now he's on the injury report, and now you're being investigated for how you handled it. I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's a reason why you're probably like the third or fourth best team in the at best in the Eastern Conference. And that's saying it's basically a stretch right now. You invested in him, and you invested in Paul George to try and get you over the hump with teams like Boston, New York, and even Milwaukee in the East. And you're right off to a poor start, and now you're having this come out. What an egregious way to start this the NBA season for the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, you invested in all this in these two, thinking, challenging Boston and New York. You're probably going to be third in that division behind those two teams again. You're more likely setting yourself up for a first round exit again. After you loft up all this money to these guys, and especially the rest of the East from the bottom is going to challenge up. Good luck, Philly. You're going to need it. I don't know why you would put this out there to have the NBA now all of a sudden come out and investigate you the way they are right now. You just look stupid and foolish as you always did when you drafted this guy, and now you basically mismanaged his career again. And now here we are back to square one. So good luck, Philly. I'll wait to see what that comes out before I say anything, because right now the brunt of the jokes in the NBA when it comes to not making the Eastern Conference Finals is the Sixers and Joel Embiid. It looks like those jokes are going to continue. So good luck. By the way, I said all along, unless Boston falls off the map, they're going back to back. So that's my NBA talk. A couple of other things that I need to bring up before I go to the boxing. First one is over in Penn State. Their head coach, James Franklin, was confronted. I guess two of his players when he was at Vanderbilt were under some criminal investigation for, I guess, the same thing Jerry Sandusky was thrown in jail for. And when he got and he basically walked off the interview after he was asked a question about the whole entire thing. Let me remind you what I think everybody, those who follow college football like myself, especially those in Nittany Valley over in Penn State, who I met a lot of nice people over there several times before. You guys know what happened to the situation with Jerry Sandusky and how Joe Paterno just ignored everything and threw it under the bus? Here you guys go again 20 some odd years later. And James Franklin just carried himself in one of the most despicable ways, in one of the most heinous acts that these four players are alleged of, or being investigated for, or whatever it is. I mean, you talk about two former players investigated for a rape charge, and you're basically just ignoring it like it's a non-issue. You're supposed to be the head coach that sets the standard at a university like that, who basically went through a mess with the whole Jerry Sandusky fiasco, about 2 decades ago, and you try to clean that up, and now here we are going through this again. What an unprofessional James Franklin is for him to just mismanage this whole thing once again. And here we are having another conversation about an institution that allows this sort of, not only allows us this sort of behavior, but that their head coach, who's supposed to be the one that sets the example, just throws it under the rug and just walks away from it. Maybe if you say something to the extent of, we'll wait till the legal process plays out, or whatever the phrase you like to use, it would have done you a little better. But to simply walk out and just act like this whole thing is a non-issue when you consider that we have victims of such of a heinous act, and you have two of former players under your watch being investigated and accused of it speaks volumes to what kind of a leader you are and what you've become. Basically, James Franklin just swept this whole thing under the rug, and it's basically a, 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 a bad thing, just a bad thing. I can speak of some other words. I'm not using a platform for it, but it's a bad look for James Franklin and the Penn State University, because here we go again. This is Jerry Sandusky, basically 2 decades later. You guys know Sandusky got charged with a whole bunch of stuff. Basically was sentenced to 30 years. I guess many years later, they restructured his sentence from 30 years to somewhere between 30 and 60, which guy's never seen a day of light ever again for all the stuff he did over there. But it looks like here we go with this again with James Franklin. These two former players, I believe it's from when he coached at Vanderbilt. But even the people at Vanderbilt say he was this kind of a person back then when he was over there. So it's the misfortune of having to go through this again for Penn State. But then again, it's Penn State. You know, they did with Jerry Sandusky. A player named Todd Hodney way back when did the same thing. It's maybe in the Penn State blood. I hate to say it because I have a lot of friends who are fans of Penn State, but it's just a bad look overall. Now on to Dana White. He was on the podcast with, I think it was Robert Griffin III, just spewing some garbage out as he always does. Talks about how he because people shouldn't be allowed to protest or do a bunch of other stuff. Still defiant on the stands of John Jones being the greatest in the UFC history. This is the same Dana White who was caught on video, you know, basically putting his hands on a woman. The same Dana White who spews the garbage he spews would pick Kamaru Usman over George St. Pierre as his greatest middleweight ever out of the UFC, and is still defiant to this day why he thinks John Jones is the greatest UFC fighter of all time. I know this. Dana White and John Jones have something in common. They love putting their hands on women. Maybe that's why Dana White backs him. Let me remind you, this is the same Dana White who protected John Jones from Francis Ngannou for the longest time, because anybody who follows the UFC knows Francis Ngannou wanted him some John Jones. If there was a face-off, I guess it was Conor Cameron not too long ago. John Jones basically tried to say to his face, "You don't want any smoke from me," and Ngannou just sit there with a blank stare, as if to say, you know, I don't think he said a word, but it looked like he wanted a piece of John Jones. I know Ngannou was on Mike Tyson's podcast calling out for a fight against John Jones, and even Tyson was backing it up, saying this fight has to happen. But Dana White, you know, you can say what you want about him, but sometimes when he opens his mouth, he starts shooting himself in the foot. I don't know why he feels the need to do that in this era where everything is out in the open, you know, with videos, podcasts, and of course fact checking, because he's been caught in numerous lies in the past. But again, he backs John Jones because he and John Jones love putting their hands on women. Dana White loves John Jones because John Jones isn't man enough to quit drugs. John Jones isn't man enough to stay out of jail. That's Dana White's type. Maybe Dana White and John Jones need to get together and have a nice little relationship and just put out there in the world, because those two are made for each other. We know he protected John Jones from Francis Ngannou for the longest time, and he's still protecting him from, I guess it's Alex Pereira. I can't even pronounce the guy's name. Because Dana White just feels the need to coddle and protect him for whatever reason, even though John Jones is just basically a waste of human flesh in this world right now. And for the morons who call John Jones the greatest of all time, you need to be checked for CTE. Pretty bad. Because John Jones's character doesn't warrant it. But I'll get to Dana White another day, because John Jones is going to fight coming up, and I'll unload more on Dana White when that time comes. Now to some historical moments of boxing. Actually, before I get to the fights, be remiss, I didn't find this out about an hour ago. Today is the 12-year anniversary where the world said goodbye to the great Emanuel Steward. A trainer, a father figure, a great humanitarian, not just a motivator, but also one that knew that the buttons to push and know how to make a man out of you. That was Emanuel Steward. Well known for his Kronk Gym in Detroit, Michigan. You know, he brought a fusillade of great fighters that fought from the gym and trained in there. The top one, of course, the hitman Thomas Hearns, introduced us to him. He was basically like a father figure to him growing up, because of the story there of Hearns and his father weren't, seeing eye to eye. So Emanuel Steward took him in and raised him as if it was his own child, because Hearns gives Steward credit to this day for making him the man that he is. Trained a lot of fighters out of the Kronk Gym. Michael Moore, Hilmer Kenty, just to name a couple. Later on, trained some bigger name fighters, like brief stint with Evander Holyfield, Julio Cesar Chavez, Oscar De La Hoya. Trained Oliver McCall when he upset Lennox Lewis in 1994. And of course, it was after that fight, Lennox Lewis reached out to Emanuel Steward to have him train him, and basically led Lennox Lewis to becoming a top 6 all-time great heavyweight. Some of the other fighters Emanuel Steward trained were the Klitschko brothers, Prince Nassim Hamed, briefly with Miguel Cotto, Miguel Angel Gonzalez. List goes on. We've had a lot of great trainers in the sport, boxing history-wise. Angelo Dundee, Gil Clancy, George Benton, Ray Arcel, who trained Roberto Duran. Freddie Roach is probably the more recent one. Maybe because of his list and how he did a great job with reclamation projects after fighters coming off of losses, like how he rebounded Lennox Lewis. Maybe Emanuel Steward might have the greatest case for being the greatest trainer of all time. How he molded Lennox Lewis after he lost to Oliver McCall to become a top 6 all-time great heavyweight, and basically how he drove him and pushed him to get to the heights that he could have, he really should have been at when he first came out of the Olympics in '88, speaks volumes. Because after that loss, because before the loss to McCall, Lennox Lewis's career was basically inconsistent. He had a couple of great wins. You get obviously against Razor Ruddock and Frank Bruno, but he had a fight against Tony Tucker where he was inconsistent. But what he did with Lennox Lewis was basically his finest work outside of what he did with Thomas Hearns. So Emanuel Stewart is probably the GOAT when it comes to boxing trainers. And when we lost him 12 years ago, the world lost a key piece of a boxing fraternity in the boxing community. Of course, did some commentating work with HBO with Jim Lampley and Larry Merchant from like 04 to when he passed. Just a phenomenal trainer. And for the work he did in Detroit and the Kronk Gym and how he molded some of these fighters into men outside of the ring, Emanuel Steward was more likely the GOAT. I won't challenge anyone who says it. I won't challenge anyone who doesn't. He's in the conversation for sure. Now to a historical event that took place 50 some odd years ago today. I bring this up because here we go again this week. We have a lot of morons in our boxing community wanted to bring up governing bodies, which I told you guys countless times. You guys need to shut up and leave the governing bodies alone, because it speaks about who you guys are at the end of the day. This was a one belt winner take all championship in the middleweight division. Gene Fullmer and Dick Tiger. One belt, all the marbles. This wasn't a political garbage like you guys like to talk about in the boxing community. This is not all these alphabet soup organizations like you guys like to talk about in the boxing community. One belt, winner takes all. Gene Fullmer was one of the more rugged fighters of that time. Sometimes he's a little reckless, sometimes toe the line a little bit, vulnerable to cuts, but a very good action-packed fighter. He won the middleweight title from the great Sugar Ray Robinson the first time, got the decision, made a defense, lost it to Robinson in the rematch where he was basically just whacked out with one perfectly timed left hook on the chin, and the fight was basically over. He lost his championship. After the fight, Gene Fullmer basically says, I don't even know what happened, because a punch hit him so hard on the chin, and it was basically all she wrote. He regained the championship in 1959 when he beat the great Carmen Basilio. That first fight with Basilio was basically regarded, I think, was also the 1959 Fight of the Year by Ring Magazine. And it was a dandy of a fight. Basically, he beat Basilio at his game and won the fight. He got a rematch win over Basilio, and later on got a draw against Ray Robinson in their third encounter, and then beat Ray Robinson in the fourth encounter, which basically gives him the 2-1-1 series over Ray Robinson, something hardly anybody can lay claim to when you go 2-1-1 against the universally recognized greatest pound-for-pound fighter of all time. And after that, he made two more successful title defenses before he ran into the great Dick Tiger. Dick Tiger was known as, his real name was Richard Ihehu. Uh, he he lived in Nigeria, moved to Liverpool, England to pursue his boxing career. Got some nice wins on his way up. Basically, beat Joey Giardello as one of them to get this shot. One of the a strong counterpuncher who came forward and was good at making you miss and making you pay with counterpunches, and was a very, very strong fighter, very strong out of chiseled. One of the surreal chins at that time, because nobody at that time was flooring Dick Tiger or hurting Dick Tiger. And this, as far as this fight goes, it was a really stirring first several rounds till the power and the precision of Tiger just took over, bloodied both eyes of Fulmer, and from that point he just gave Fulmer a beating. And basically the last 4 or 5 rounds, the mask started to show on Fulmer's face. One was a cut like right in here on the eyelid. It was basically almost like the size of a pea, or a cut carrot right in there. It was real big and nasty. It was bloody down his eye, and the fight was, you can see whether it stopped or not, but that's who Gene Fulmer was. He was a blood and guts warrior who basically was willing to go toe-to-toe with you, and he did it on this night with Dick Tiger. Problem was, Dick Tiger just brought way too much to the table, and when the decision was announced, Dick Tiger accomplished his goal to become the undisputed middleweight champion of the world. And again, one belt, undisputed champion. Not the political garbage you guys in the boxing community like to talk about. One belt, legit championship, undisputed champion. Period. That was Dick Tiger on that night at the Candle. Actually, this fight took place at the Candlestick Park in San Francisco. The old part that saw the Joe Montana dynasty in the 80s. Used to host big fights, and this was one of them it hosted. Dick Tiger flew from Liverpool to the end of San Francisco and basically won the middleweight championship of the world and brought it home to Liverpool. They were going to have 2 more fights. The second one, Tiger, basically Fulmer got off to a good start, changed his style a little bit because of how beaten up he was, but Tiger came on at the end to salvage a draw in a fight that could have gone either way. And the third fight, basically Dick Tiger just beat up Gene Fulmer to where Gene Fulmer retired on the stool and essentially retired from the sport. That was the last fight for Gene Fulmer. Dick Tiger goes on to have a stellar career. He did lose this title and against I think it was Joey Giardello. I can't think of his name. He did win it back, lost it to Emil Griffith, but maybe his big win came when he went up to light heavyweight and shocked Jose Torres, who was a 3-1 favorite going into that fight. Now, let me remind you, you were a 6-1 betting. If you were a 3-1 underdog and you were winning a fight back in the 60s, it's classified as a giant upset. Not quite the level Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson with, but it was pretty big because 3-1 odds were basically a big deal back in the 1960s. But Dick Tiger did ascend himself to one of the top 100 greatest fighters of all time. I mean, people put him in the 70s and 80s range. Again, it's all subject to opinion. I don't partake in it. But Dick Tiger was one of the real all-time greats. The only real thing that went wrong with him was when he fought Bob the Sheriff Foster and basically got pasted on the canvas in the 4th round. But then again, Bob Foster was one of the premier punchers in the light heavyweight division. But doesn't assert the fact that Dick Tiger was a true, genuine, all-time great for his time and basically wound up being one of the all-time greats. And he basically, his run started when he beat Gene Fulmer the first time. So that's the history lesson of Dick Tiger and Gene Fulmer. The first 2 fights were good. The third fight was basically a wipeout, basically by Tiger, but that's because Fulmer was on his downside. But it's still a pretty solid trilogy. Two great fighters, Gene Fulmer and Dick Tiger. Thank you. Salute to you guys at the gates of heaven. Now to one that took place 34 years ago. Speaking of men on a mission, the real deal, Evander Holyfleld, finally got what his mission was to become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, and he did it on this day. It was basically considered, I can remember the billing, some equivalent of Judgment Day when he fought James Buster Douglas after Douglas shocked Mike Tyson. One lazy uppercut by Douglas counter right hand over the top. Douglas is down and out for the count in the third round. Fight's over. We get misconstrued with this because everyone was trying to get Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson to fight. That was a big thing. We get it. Evander Holyfield said all along, this is where everybody misses the point. He wasn't there to fight Mike Tyson. He was there to be the heavyweight champion of the world. He was interviewed after Buster Douglas upset Mike Tyson by HBO, and he basically said he came into that fight with an open mind, that even though he didn't get Mike Tyson, he was going to get whoever was going to win the heavyweight title, because he was the mandatory for the winner of that fight, and he'd been the mandatory since he moved up to heavyweight. And there's been a lot of stalling points for the longest time with the Holyfield-Tyson fight, largely because of the bad blood between Don King and the Duvas. That's something everybody misses. Now, the original tentative fight was June 16, 1990, but 4 months before, Buster Douglas happened. Buster Douglas knocks out Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson's on all fours with his mouth, looking for his mouthpiece, because the guy doesn't even know what the hell he was doing. Even Mike said it himself. No, I don't want to hear about the long count, because that was not a long count. Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas fair and square. End of story. Fast forward to what took place 34 years ago today in Vegas. James Buster Douglas had surreal motivation to beat Mike Tyson, as we know. He lost his mom. I believe also his baby mom wasn't the greatest of health either. Brought himself down to 230. It was a phenomenal shape. So he goes into the fight with Evander Holyfield as a so-called sentimental favorite because of the victory over Mike Tyson. Comes into the weight scales 246 pounds. And, of course, fighting Evander Holyfield, who was driven to be the heavyweight champion of the world, he was basically badly programmed for success going into this fight, because he basically just came in and almost didn't give a darn. Of course, when you get paid $24 million like Buster Douglas did that night, you're not going to give a darn. So he basically, if you want to put it that way, cashed out and lost the title in the process, and basically just was basically an embarrassment because Evander Holyfield did anything and everything to him. The capper, of course, the lazy uppercut from like 2 miles out, the counter right hand over the top, Douglas down, out for the count. And that was basically all she wrote. James Buster Douglas had ability to do something if he really wanted to do it. I mean, you saw it against Tyson. He had a decent winning streak after he lost to Tony Tucker to get the shot at Tyson. He had a solid win over Oliver McCall where he looked pretty good. I mean, he had the ability. Great ability. I mean, of course, his key punch was a terrific left jab, which he peppered Tyson all night with, and among other heavyweights. But it just never a guy that was consistent and never wanted. Maybe I don't know if his heart was in it or not. I'm not a psychologist in that regard, but he had the ability, if you saw the Tyson fight, to be something special. And in fact, the problem with him, he wasn't consistent enough. Of course, part of it is him going up and down the scales. They had a display of it on the closed circuit version, I remember. It was showed here because he went from 230 when he beat Tyson to 246 when he fought Evander Holyfield. He had some real ability. We talk about a guy 6'4" in the 230, 240 range, mobile, sort of deceptively quick for a bigger man. But that left jab of his was pepper. Maybe not as great as someone like Larry Holmes or Lennox Lewis, but a pretty darn good one in his day. But again, it ended with the Holyfield fight largely because his heartbeat wasn't in it, and his inconsistencies basically unveiled on that night. Before Evander Holyfield, it was the beginning. His place in history is secure. You can say what you want about him being a dirty fighter, all the accusations you want to accuse him of, whatever. He had the fact he won 2 times. He was a legit heavyweight champion. Picked up a couple belts later on. Ducked no one. Basically fought everyone in his era, win, lose, or draw, however you sliced it up. Basically, with the exception of the 2 fights against Lennox Lewis, beat everyone that was in front of him. He avenged the loss to Riddick Bowe, avenged the loss to Michael Moore. He beat Tyson twice. Legitimately. I don't want to hear about the excuses of the ear bite because, Mike Tyson was as bit as dirty as Evander Holyfield was. For the obvious reasons. Of course, the 2 fights with Lennox Lewis, it was basically it. Lennox Lewis was just a stylistic nightmare for Evander Holyfield. Did pick up a 4th belt, albeit in gift ways, but still doesn't deter the fact that in the when the 90s got hot in the heavyweight division, Buster Douglas, Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, Ray Mercer, Tommy Morrison, David Tua. List goes on and on. Evander Holyfield was in the middle of that and basically brought action, fight in and fight out, ducked no one, fought them all, beat them all with the sole exception of Lennox Lewis. But we know how great Lennox Lewis was. See what you may, nitpick it how you want. It doesn't matter. The dude's he's still an all-time great. He's rightfully in the Hall of Fame, arguably the greatest cruiserweight of all time. That's all needs to be said. He wasn't called the real deal for nothing. And it was a great showing. It all started on that night in 1990. He's supposed to fight Mike Tyson in 91. Mike Tyson faked a rib injury, of course, led to the trial. Holyfield had its own issues. They finally fight in 96. Holyfield beats the brakes off of him from start to finish, which I said all along. Any version of Evander Holyfield beats any version of Mike Tyson, largely because Holyfield was never afraid of him. That's the one thing Evander Holyfield had in all of his fights. No fear. That's why he has a chance against anyone in any era. Not saying he beats them all, but he has against anybody in any era. If he fights you, you're gonna get you're in for a fight because he was never afraid of anyone. I mean, the guy was fighting Riddick Bowe, who was 6'5", 235, and he was 6'2", 206. Think about that for a minute. I mean, even though he really went 0-2 against Lennox Lewis, at least he fought him because Riddick, as I said before, Riddick Bowe threw a belt in the garbage can to duck him. Evander Holyfield said, "I gotta fight him. Let's do it." The fact he ducked no one speaks to who he is. But on this day, 34 years ago, is where it all began. His mission was to become the heavyweight champion of the world, and Evander Holyfield accomplished it. Man, boy, I wish I could relive those days again. Because today the heavyweight division sort of stinks. I mean, we have Usyk Fury 2, but that's about it. And that will wrap up this loaded edition of Sirhan on X. I hope everybody out there has themselves a wonderful Friday and weekend. I will be off until Monday. Soon I will be going to primetime. And next Wednesday, I will have a 1-hour show dedicated to an historical event. One show, one event. Everyone, come aboard. You're going to like it. I'm just devoting next Wednesday to one event that changed a lot of things in this world. It happened. It will be the 50-year anniversary of it. I won't reveal it because I don't want to blow the surprise, especially those in the sports and boxing communities. But until then, I will be off for the weekend. I'll be back Monday. Happy Football Friday to everyone in the high school, college, and football fields. Success to all the teams out there. Good luck. Until then, everybody take care of themselves. Good night. Have a good day. Have a great weekend, and God bless.